always have to sing it. I can't usually say it. It's good to have those in our memory, the apostles of Jesus. Let's start our reading at verse 17. I think you might have covered these, but just at verse 17, let's pick up there. And he, Jesus, came down with them and stood in the plain in the company of his disciples and a great multitude of people out of all Judea and Jerusalem and from the seacoast of Tyre and Sidon, which came to hear him and to be healed of their diseases. And they that were vexed with unclean spirits, and they were healed. And the whole multitude sought to touch him, for there went virtue out of him and healed them all. We talk about the miracles of Jesus, and we've got lots of specific miracles recorded that Jesus did. But very often when it talks about the miracles of Jesus, it talks about them in a sense like this, where just multitudes were coming and they were all being healed. And so the actual number of healings, for instance, that Jesus did, we couldn't actually even put a number on it, but it was way up there. And it's always significant that whenever it mentions that sort of thing, look there at the end of verse 19, and healed them all. It wasn't that, Jesus got lucky once in a while and an apparent healing took place. In every instance, he healed. He never failed. He never failed in his healings. That's one of the contrasts that we have with what I like to call fake healers rather than faith healers today. The fake healers of our day, of course, they can't do any real miracles. They can't do any real healings. But when they fail, they always try to offer an explanation. It's because you didn't have enough faith. If you had had enough faith, you would have received a healing. In the case of Jesus, he healed all who came to him. And so there's a distinction there. We always repeat that these miracles were for the very purpose of confirming his identity, revealing and confirming him to be the Son of God. I also want to emphasize from those verses that Jesus is immensely popular. And that's going to really continue clear up until the time of his crucifixion. It wasn't the masses of people who turned against Jesus. It was the elite Jewish leadership in Jerusalem that called out for his crucifixion. And we'll talk more about that when we get to the end of his life. But I think it should really be stressed the immense popularity of Jesus. Multitudes were thronging around him, just hoping to touch him if they could. Tom?
We just touched on this last week, but the draw, if you look at the geographic area that he's drawing from right now, and if you look at topography and different things, people had to make an effort to come and see him. Here they're coming from the plains of Tyre and Sidon up into the region of Galilee and then around the Sea of Galilee and things, and they're just converging on it. Yeah. And evidently, even when he went up to appoint his apostles, and we don't have the exact amount of time that he was there, but he was there at least a day in doing that these people were gathered to him. When he came down, they were waiting for him.
Yeah. If you think about the circumstance of these people, they were in desperate circumstance. These physically afflicted people with diseases, people with unclean spirits, they were grasping at a hope of something better. And Jesus was providing that for them by healing these diseases that were, in many instances, incurable diseases. And he was healing them all, and he wasn't failing. And you think about the news of that getting circulated, you can understand why just throngs of people would come to see him, to hear him, to touch him, to get some blessing from him. Tom?
Also, looking at that, the divisions of individuals. You had, the Pharisees and skeptics that, were coming out trying to accuse him. We, talked on that last week. But here, you had the crowds coming in, then you have these disciples, and then you have the named 12 that are there. And in this area right here, he encompasses all those together in that aspect. So he's drawing in his inner circle at this point. Prior to, we talked about, we see where, he called, Peter, James, and John as fishermen. But he had contact with them prior to that. Here Andrew was, evidently a disciple John the Baptist, and then came to Peter. They look who we found. Daniel, the same thing. He called them there, but they hadn't really been named apostles yet. They were disciples. They were followers of his.
Yeah. He called his disciples, and of them he chose 12 whom he named apostles, it says there in verse 13. So there was a distinction at this point between, as you say, they were his disciples before this. Now they received this distinction. All right, so let's pick up some new info then, beginning at verse 20. And starting at verse 20, we have Luke's sort of abbreviated account of much of what Jesus taught in the Sermon on the Mount. Now, Matthew's account of the Sermon on the Mount takes 3 chapters, Matthew 5, 6, and 7. Luke's account is going to just take part of the rest of this chapter. So Luke's accounting of this teaching more abbreviated than Matthew's, but obviously very important. Let's read it, verse 20. I'm in Luke 6 at verse 20. And he lifted up his eyes on his disciples and said, Blessed be ye poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are ye that hunger now, for ye shall be filled. Blessed are ye that weep now, for ye shall laugh. Blessed are ye when men shall hate you, and when they shall separate you from their company, and shall reproach you, and cast out your name as evil for the Son of Man's sake. Rejoice ye in that day, and leap for joy, for behold, your reward is great in heaven. For in the like manner did their fathers unto the prophets. But woe unto you that are rich, for ye have received your consolation. Woe unto you that are full, for ye shall hunger. Woe unto you that laugh now, for ye shall mourn and weep. Woe unto you when all men shall speak well of you, for so did their fathers to the false prophets. Okay. What do you think he has in mind when he says, Blessed are the poor, for yours is the kingdom? Is there a spiritual advantage to being monetarily poor? And if there is, should we just dispose of all of our personal wealth and just be extremely poverty-stricken? What's he talking about here? Anybody? Monty?
Well, there can be a spiritual advantage to being poor, because then you're not focused on what you've got in all your possessions. But if you're poor, then you might be focused on what you don't have and the things that you're in need of. And so I think when he's talking about the poor here, he's talking about people that are that don't think so highly of themselves. Their esteem of themselves is poor because they're thinking more about God and his exaltedness rather than their own status.
I think that's right. In comparing Matthew's parallel statement, Matthew 5, verse 3, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And so I don't think he's necessarily, it could certainly encompass how we view material wealth, but I think the poverty here that he is commending to them is a poverty of spirit, a humility. You know, those who are proud typically aren't looking for any solution to any problems that they have. They're not seeking because they're self-satisfied. And so I believe that the poverty here is not primarily or exclusively a poverty of money. Although if my money and my material possessions and my material pursuits are keeping me from serving God faithfully, then I need to dispose of those. If that's keeping me from sincerely and genuinely seeking God, then I'd be better off to have not a dollar in my pocket so that I can have heaven. James?
Well, you'll get to the woes to the rich in a minute. I think we can make the same kind of comparison.
Yeah.
If we look at Matthew or Levi, it was called he was rich, most likely. So it's not those that are either have no money or have a lot of money, either better off or what your heart is like. His heart, even though he was rich, he was willing to give up whatever it is to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Same with the poor. The poor are looking and longing for things. Maybe their wealth isn't there to hold them away from God, but even if you're rich, you can let go of those things and go after what God wants you to.
Right. You know, we'll come to, in Luke chapter 12, we will come to to the story that Jesus told about the rich fool. In chapter 12, you remember, he tells that story about the man. He's, I'm going to pull down my barns and build greater, and I'll say to my soul, take thine ease, eat, drink, and be merry. And he was not rich toward God. We'll read that in Luke chapter 12. There's no condemnation of wealth per se in the scriptures. There's certainly plenty of warnings about thinking too much of wealth and making wealth our top priority. Look in 1 Timothy chapter 6. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, it is one of those warnings about our attitude toward wealth. I think you remember well, 1 Timothy 6, verse 6, godliness with contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into this world, as certain we can carry nothing out, and having food and raiment, let us be therewith content. But they that will be rich fall into temptation and a snare, into many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. So notice there that Paul was warning about, again, attitude toward wealth. Those who will be rich. Doesn't say you are rich, but those who have that as their driving influence in life, they that will be rich fall into temptation and a snare. The love of money is the root of all evil. But in that same chapter, skip down to verse 17, 1 Timothy 6:17. Charge them that are rich in this world, that they be not high-minded, nor trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God, who giveth us give us richly all things to enjoy, that they do good, that they be rich in good works, ready to distribute, willing to communicate, laying up in store for themselves a good foundation against the time to come, that they may lay hold on eternal life. So in the same chapter, he warns about money, the attitude toward money, and then he addresses the rich, and he does not say give up all your money, but he says use it effectively in God's service. And so, again, back to our text. Now, I don't want to get too far off our text. We could talk a long time about that. But I think certainly that the poverty that he's commending here, blessed be ye poor, for yours is the kingdom of heaven. It's not necessarily exclusively poor monetarily. It's those who have a poverty of spirit. They are the ones who will inherit the kingdom of God. And I think it's the same thing true in verse 21. Blessed are ye that hunger now, for ye shall be filled. Again, Matthew's account says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness. And so there's no spiritual advantage to being hungry. Not necessarily. And he's not saying, clear your pantry shelves off. Get rid of all your stored up foodstuffs, because you really need, your stomach needs to be growling. You need to be physically hungry so that you can be filled. He's not talking about that. The hungering there is for a righteousness. A hungering is for a right relationship with God. Urgently desiring that. That's what he's commending. He's not commending physical hunger. But again, it might come to that. Maybe I have to make some decisions in order to be right with God. I have to make some decisions that put me into poverty and even physical hunger. So I'm on the job, and my job is requiring me to do things that are ungodly. I have to sin to keep this job. Well, I'd be better off to get rid of that job and maybe even not have all the food I need in order to be right with God. So it could include physical hunger. I'm not saying it excludes that, but that's not the primary thing he's talking about. It's a hungering and desiring for righteousness. Tom?
David invites a number of Psalms, and he was in some of his deepest, not only depression, but trials and things going through. He could, as king, he could have easily turned away from God and, taking matters in his own hands. But he turned to God, he looked for God for the direction and guidance and deliverance for that, and he put his reliance on that. And then we look at the example of Job. Here, Job was in a situation of rich and powerful and just everything going his way, and it was wiped out. But he still, even in that situation, he still turned to God and looked to praise God and honor God because he knew that God was one that provided all things for him.
Good. Yeah, good example. So again, I think our explanation of this is correct. I think it's certainly aided by Matthew's parallel statements in chapter 5, the Beatitudes. Blessed are ye that weep now, for ye shall laugh. Well, I'm sure that atheists weep from time to time, maybe more often than we imagine. I think their lives are pretty meaningless, and it may provoke them to weep pretty often. But I mean, you don't have to even be a believer in God to weep. So when he says, "Blessed are ye that weep now, for ye shall laugh," I don't think he's talking about weeping over whatever the difficulties and trials and the issues that come up in day-to-day living. Sometimes that just brings tears to your eyes, especially maybe if someone in your family is sick or you've lost a loved one, you cry. But there's no spiritual advantage to crying per se. People of this world cry from time to time over various things. I think clearly here that the weeping is a weeping over our past, our sins, our wrongs, a broken and contrite spirit. The Psalms talk about. I weep over my sinfulness. That's got to be contextually. I think that's got to be what he's talking about, because there's no spiritual benefit to weeping. Everybody weeps from time to time. But this carries a benefit. And I think it's that sorrow for sin that he's commending. Tom?
Just interesting, if you go back to right there, the first part of 20, almost like he's directing this directly to his disciples and the benefit of the crowds that gathered around him. But he's talking to his disciples almost directly, not just all the apostles that he just named, but all of his disciples. And he's sort of going through and directing it to them, because it says he turns his gaze towards them, and then he starts in talking to us. Some of this is going to be personally affecting them themselves as they chose to follow him and do his will. And it applies to us as well if we are considered his apostles. So it's sort of a direct message. It has a benefit to all people, but really to those that are followers of his, it really has an important direction.
Okay, all right. Verse 22, blessed are ye when men shall hate you, and when they shall separate you from their company, and shall reproach you, and cast out your name as evil for the Son of Man's sake. Rejoice ye in that day, and leap for joy, for behold, your reward is great in heaven. For in like manner did their fathers unto the prophets. So again, I think that really ties it all together, the last expression, verse 23. The benefit of being, the benefit of the kind of poverty, the kind of hunger, the kind of weeping, the benefit of the kinds that he's talking about is a reward in heaven. A poor man, a hungry man, a weeping man doesn't necessarily, an atheist could do all of those things and not have any reward in heaven. And so I think that really helps us to explain that the poverty, the hunger, and the weeping he's talking about have to do with our spiritual relationship to God, not our physical condition. Because the benefit of all of these things is a reward in heaven. And so I think that kind of confirms our explanation of these verses. Again, it's not a pleasant thing in the moment to be hated by men, to have them cast us out, to persecute us. It's not pleasant in the moment, but it brings a great reward in heaven. If you're faithful enough that when persecution comes, in other words, your faithfulness provokes persecution and you endure it, great is your reward in heaven. Any thoughts on the ones who are going to be blessed? Now we're going to start in verse 24. We're going to talk about the woes of the people on the other side of that spectrum. Any thoughts here? Verse 24, then he says, "But woe to you that are rich, for ye have received your consolation." Again, we already talked about this in 1 Timothy 6. Rich people were not commanded to sacrifice all their riches to be a faithful Christian. Philemon, for instance, in our New Testament, we think Philemon was probably a pretty wealthy individual. He was not told to get rid of his wealth. There likely were others who had pretty good physical possessions. I would guess that Cornelius, for instance, probably, I don't think he was a poor man. He was a centurion in the Roman army. He was a high-ranking official. The Ethiopian eunuch, I mean, he was a high-ranking government official in Ethiopia. He was not told, now when you get home, get rid of all your money for sure, because you can't be a faithful Christian if you have any money in the bank. And so, again, I would argue in verse 24, woe to the rich who put their trust in their riches. That's who he's got to be talking about. And if that's what you're doing, and if that's what you're after, and you get it, then you have your consolation. If that's the driving force in your life, and you acquire it, you achieve it, okay, you got what you were after. Don't expect anything else. That's the gist of verse 24. Woe to you that are full, for ye shall hunger. Again, here's a wealthy person. He has everything that his soul could desire. He has money. He has wealth. He has an abundance of the best foods available. Okay, if that's what you're doing, then you're gonna be hungry later on. When the final judgment comes and there's an accounting for all things, you'll experience the worst kind of hunger as you suffer eternally. Woe to you that laugh now. Hey, listen, when we came in here this morning, I heard some of you all laughing. Now, I don't want to hear any more of that. Now, you all get a scowl on your face, and I better not, I hope I don't even see somebody cracking a smile. You better not laugh no matter what. Obviously, that's not right. Obviously, that's not right. He's talking about those who are carefree in this world, who have no concern for the things of God. They don't have any serious effort in pursuit of righteousness. They're in it for the moment. They're enjoying all the gratifications that life can provide. That's who he's talking about. He said, you're going to weep later on. Those of you who live that way, you will weep later on. Okay? I think that's very clear here. And I don't think we have to dig too deep to understand that statement contextually. And then verse 26 is, I think, really a powerful one. Woe to you when all men shall speak well of you, for so did their fathers to the false prophets. A lot of religious people in our day and time need to take that statement from Jesus and take it to heart, because that seems to be what lots of religious groups are all about. They want to be in the popular mainstream. They don't want to take any position that's unpopular. You know, they certainly wouldn't want to be regarded as some sort of religious fanatic. Just make sure everybody thinks well of you. Make sure everybody speaks well of you. You can be a Christian nominally. You can carry that name, but certainly don't do anything that would make you unpopular in the eyes of men. Make sure that everybody speaks well of you. Jesus said, if everybody's speaking well of you, you need to be on guard, because that's sort of a self-test. He said, if all men speak well of you, remember that that's what your fathers did to the false prophets. What did the false prophets in the Old Testament do? Exactly right. The false prophets told people what they wanted to hear. Not what they needed to hear, but what they wanted to hear. What's the vast majority of religious teaching in our world today like? Exactly that. And so, this is sort of a good self-test. None of us like to be unpopular or to be excluded. We don't like to be considered as fanatics or weirdos. I mean, we don't seek that out. That's not what we're after. That's not our. But if it doesn't happen, then it probably means we're not standing up firmly for God's truth, because God's faithful people through all time, Old Testament and New, God's faithful people have always been disregarded, disrespected, and persecuted. And so if we're not, then red flags should pop up, that there's potentially something very wrong. If all men are speaking well of us, there's something very wrong. So right here we are in Columbia, Tennessee, Murray County, Tennessee. My opinion is that this congregation, in the eyes of some people, we are viewed as weirdos, fanatics, ultra-conservatives, and all that sort of thing. And they would point the finger at us. Well, so maybe we need to tone it down. Years ago, there was a fellow who attended here, and he actually came to me and told me that I needed to tone down my preaching and teaching because it was running people off. People were being excluded because of the hardline teaching that we were doing here at College View. Well, our intention is not to run people off. That's certainly not our intention at all. But if we're teaching a message that is agreeable to everyone, then I'm saying Jesus tells us that's a high percentage warning sign. We're not doing it on purpose, but I'm telling you, if we just teach the truth of God, there are going to be people who don't like it. We just got to be willing to accept that. Tom?
Ahab, one of the kings of Judah, came up with motion to go to war against somebody. The king of Judah asked him, isn't there a prophet in the land that can tell us something? And I think Ahab said, yeah, there's this guy over here. He never tells me what I want to hear.
Yeah, Micaiah. All the others had told him, yeah, go, you'll be victorious. And one of them even made some metal horns, and he said, you're going to gore the king of Syria like this. And I think it was Jehoshaphat, wasn't it, who said, isn't there another one we can consult? Yeah, there's this prophet Micaiah, but he always says bad things about me. I don't want to talk to him. But unfortunately, that's the way it is with a lot of religious people. Okay, so again, be aware that if we are in the popular mainstream, that is not a place where we really want to be, because that puts us in the category of the false prophets who've gone before. All right, anything else on that section? Anybody? All right, let's read a few more verses here at 27. But I say unto you which hear, love your enemies, do good to them which hate you, bless them that curse you, pray for them which despitefully use you. And unto him that smiteth thee on the one cheek, offer also the other. And him that taketh away thy cloak, forbid not to take thy coat also. Give to every man that asketh thee, and of him that taketh away thy goods, ask them not again. And as ye would that men should do to you, do ye also to them likewise. For if ye love them which love you, what thank have you? For sinners also love those that love them. But if ye do good to them which do good to you, what thank have ye? For the sinners also do even the same. And if ye lend to them of whom ye hope to receive, what thank have you? For sinners also lend to sinners to receive as much again. But love ye your enemies, and do good, and lend, hoping for nothing again. And your reward shall be great, and ye shall be the children of the highest, for he is kind unto the unthankful and to the evil. Okay, these are some hard verses right here. I'll tell you, I don't think these verses are hard to understand. I think these are hard verses to apply. This is a real challenge. Wayne, we're at Luke 6:27. Love your enemies, do good to them that hate you. That is such an easy statement to roll off the lips, but it is so hard to put into practice. Love your enemies, do good to them which hate you. Man, my inclination is to hate my enemies and to do bad to them who do bad to me. I'll get even with you. In fact, I'm going to do bad to you before you get a chance to do bad to me. I'm going to get ahead of you in that. That's the way of the world, and that's the way we're tempted to be, right? This is a really challenging instruction from Jesus. Love your enemies. Pray for them that despitefully use you. I don't know. I want to tell you that I really have a problem with that. That's hard for me. I work at it, but I don't know how successful I am. I don't think I'm very successful, actually. That is really hard. Any thoughts on that? Anybody offer a suggestion of what might make it easier? Amani.
Well, if we think about it, what Jesus is telling them to do here, he led by example on that. Because as far as loving his enemy and praying for them, he done that even when he was on the cross. He asked God to forgive them for they don't know what they do. So he was praying for his enemies, the very people that was killing them, he's praying for them. He loved them in advance because he left the glories of heaven to come live on the earth as a relatively poor man with not the finest and best of everything there was, and to be put to death for them so that they didn't have to go to hell. So he taught us and led with a really great example about doing that. But at the same time, he didn't say this is an easy commandment and this is going to be just easy as falling off the log. He's really set a high bar and a great challenge for us because, as you said, human nature is, if you treat me bad, I'm going to get even with you. And because I'm going to give you back with interest, I'm going to give you more bad than you gave me so this don't happen again. That's our human nature. But Jesus is saying, you're going to have to, as he tells us about a lot of things, we've got to have self-control and self-discipline. We've got to be treating people good, even though they treat us bad. And we're called to be different from them. We're not going to be like them. We're not going to repay evil with evil. But we're going to treat you good. And if you treat us bad, okay, fine. That's between you and God. He'll take care of it. And I think that's part of our problem is we think, I personally have to take care of this. When they've done bad to me, I'm the one that's got to fix it. Well, the Bible tells us vengeance belongs to God. It's not my job to fix it, to take vengeance. It's not our responsibility. In the law of Moses, there was the avenger of blood. If somebody killed one of my family members, I might be appointed the one to go hunt them down and kill them. In the New Testament, it says God's vengeance belongs to God. He'll do the repaying. All I got to do is try to be like Jesus. And all the repaying is in God's hand. And I think when we accept that and make that our attitude, it's going to make this a whole lot easier for us.
Okay, well said. I think that's exactly right. Josh?
Yeah, I just think all this is about perspective. All there is here and now, and you do me wrong, then I'm going to get you back because everything I got is right here and now. But my perspective is spiritual, and that's what Jesus is talking about. The underlying thing is, and they always got it confused. His disciples, even they were thinking physically, he was talking spiritually about things. And so when you think spiritually, though, my enemy, if I do bad to them, I'll have to answer for that one day. I'm never going to be a good example to them. They're never going to do right if I'm doing bad to them. So I'm going to answer for it. They're going to answer for it. So I need to be making sure that I'm doing right.
Good point.
So it's just a spiritual focus.
Good point. James?
And Monty was talking about Jesus as an example. A lot of times when we're being persecuted, we are the ones in the weaker position. And even though we wanted to maybe get even with them, maybe it wouldn't do any good because they were powerful ones. Think about Jesus and his ability to be under control and to be forgiven and to allow God to be the judge ultimately of these men while he was going through the suffering. He had every opportunity and power to remedy the situation and to exact judgment on them then. And we don't usually have that, but that's how powerful he had. And so if he could control that, even when he had the power to do everything against them.
I think that's really good observation. He's saying do that, and he did it. Because like you say, a lot of times when we're mistreated, we're out of luck because we don't have any power to react. Jesus had all power to react when he was treated evilly, and he didn't use any of that power. Really good observation, I think. Okay, let's catch verse 29, and then we're probably going to be out of time. But verse 29 is a verse that is used by people who would argue that we cannot defend ourselves. And typically the label, I don't know if it's a fair label, but the label we usually describe is a pacifist. A pacifist is one who thinks that we cannot act in our own self-defense in any way at all. And this is a verse that they would use. This is one of the verses that they would use to argue that position. Unto him that smiteth thee on the one cheek, offer also the other. And him that taketh away thy cloak, forbid not to take thy coat also. I certainly respect the conscience I know some really good, faithful people that have that view of pacifism. Can't defend yourself, and I certainly respect them and respect their conscience in that. But that's not my understanding. Now, certainly we are not to be aggressors. Certainly we're not to be in the business of personal vengeance taking. You know, this guy came, even in extreme cases, this intruder came into my house and he killed my wife and he left. I'm going to hunt him down. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to hunt that guy down. If it's the last thing I ever do in my life, I'm going to get him and I'm going to do to him like he did to my wife. Absolutely not. Personal vengeance is always forbidden. We're not, but in the moment of issue, when we're under personal attack, our loved ones or other innocent people are under attack, I believe that we can act in a defensive mode, not the aggressor, but the defensive mode. And to help understand this, again, we're trying not to jump back and forth between Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We're just studying Luke. But in this instance, go to Matthew's account of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, verse 38. Matthew 5, verse 38. Ye have heard that it hath been said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Now, that was in the Old Testament, but it was not authority for personal vengeance. That was the civil law under the law of Moses. If you harmed a person, then the civil authorities were to punish you in kind to what you had done to someone. It was never a license, even under the Old Testament, to go out and seek personal vengeance. Lots of people have tried to misuse the verse that way. But Jesus said, you have heard an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you that ye resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also. All right, I think this verse really helps understand the verse in Luke. And I know you all have heard me explain this before, but I don't believe that verse 39 there, Matthew 5:39, I don't believe he's talking about a physical assault which would threaten your personal life or safety. I don't think it's a life-threatening assault. You know, when someone slaps you, that's not a life-threatening assault, you know. It's typically an insult or a taunt. And I even think there's significance here in Matthew's account. You resist not evil. Whosoever shall smite thee on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. Now, you all have heard me explain this before. Most people are right-handed. So I come up to Joel. His right cheek is over there. If I'm a right-handed person and I'm going to slap him on his right cheek, I got to do it this way. I got to do it with backhanded. Right? That's not the way you would typically assault someone to do bodily harm. That's an insult. That's a taunt. If I came up to Joel and slapped him like that, I'd be trying to provoke him into a fight. And Jesus says, turn the other cheek. Don't be easily provoked into a fight. I don't think he's describing a life-threatening situation there. I think he's describing a situation where someone is trying to provoke us or taunt us. And it's in the context here in Luke chapter 6 where we're reading, it's in the context of your enemies who, despitefully use you. So I don't think, I'm back to our text, Luke 6:29. I don't think he's saying you can't defend yourself from physical harm, someone who's attacking with intention to kill or hurt you, or other innocent people around you. I don't think the pacifists have got this verse right. I think this is in the vein of your enemies who would despitefully use you and persecute you, and who would taunt you and try to provoke you to react to their provocations. Don't do it. That's what Jesus is saying. Don't be that person. Any thoughts? We're out of time. Any thoughts or comments? Monty?
If you look back to the context of Matthew, he's talking about the eye for an eye. That was a legal process. That wasn't personal vengeance. Then he talks about, in the New King James, use the word slaps you on your right cheek. And then it talks about if anyone wants to sue you, or in verse 41, whoever compels you to go 1 mile. The Romans could require you, the soldier, to carry his pack for a mile. So what he's talking about here are legal things, or things that could be required of you legally. And the slapping has to do with, as you said, somebody trying to insult you. In this time in history, as well as later on, people will walk up, maybe take a glove and slap you across the face with it in order to provoke you, to challenge you to a duel, or to provoke you into a fight or something like that, especially when they thought they had the upper hand. So what he's teaching us here is not to have negative reactions to things people do. If somebody slaps me, using the term slap, this is not a life-threatening thing. I don't have to jump on them and beat them half to death, or whip out a gun and shoot them, or something like that. If you slap me, I can let it go, because you're not causing me irreparable harm. You're just trying to make me mad and provoke me into doing something that's wrong.
I think you're right. All right, we're out of time. Thanks, everybody. We'll pick it up. We didn't completely finish that section, so Lord willing, we'll pick it up there next week. Thanks, everybody.